Okay, so now I have everything up and running. I ran my npm watch, separate terminal, I got Python running, and now I'm going to preview the app. Okay, as usual, I'm going to pop it into a separate browser because I always like doing that. Cool. So I'm going to hard refresh and then Command Option I to open up the terminal, or you can just right click and inspect element. And let's see what it does. Right now it looks like we're going to be logging in with OAuth, so let's see what happens. Okay, so this is doing nothing. It's logging something. It says sent the name John Doe. In fact, all of them are saying sent the name John Doe. So you can see here, GitHub button did that, Facebook button did that, all of them did that. So there's 6 different buttons. None of them do anything except console log. So as usual, I'm going to start with the template. So index.html, we open that up and we see that this is a React app. Great. I'm going to close that out. Static, we don't have to worry about. Let's go in here and open up main. Main says it's going to render content and put it in content. Great. Let's close that. Let's go into content. Now this is where things start getting interesting. So content is saying we import 6 different buttons, so one from each of these, then the socket. Okay. Then inside of content we have a React hook for accounts. We have get all accounts, which basically says whenever we mount this, we're going to have a socket on accounts received. And then whenever we receive new accounts, we're going to say, oh, we've received new accounts from the server, set the accounts equal to all accounts. And then presumably we'll do something here in this to do the accounts, to use those accounts for something. Okay. And then lastly, we have this. So this is an H1, so we have this, and we have each button. Notice here that I'm really separating out this class logic. So each of these classes is doing one specific thing. So if you have like 2 different headers or something and they do different things, separate them into different different JS files or React functions. That's just going to make your code more modular and easier to implement, easier to test, etc. So we're not going to do all of these different buttons today, but let's go ahead and figure out what these different buttons do. So let's open up GitHub button. That's the first one in the list. GitHub button says function handle submit, replace the name from OAuth, replace with name from OAuth. So right now we have a hard-coded name. We're putting that into the socket emit. We're console.logging and then basically saying that this button does that, does this function. Cool. So console.log John Doe, it's always going to say sent the name John Doe to server because name is hard-coded right now. But it's also emitting new GitHub user. So let's keep that in mind while we go on to other buttons. Let's figure out what's next with Facebook. If we look at these two, just switching back and forth, looks like they're the exact same, except this one has Facebook in the name and it says login with Facebook, and then it's called Facebook button. So they're pretty much identical, except the channel or the event that they're emitting on the socket is different. This one's new GitHub user, this one's new Facebook user. Cool. I'm assuming all the buttons are the same, and in fact they are, so I'm going to skip over looking at all of those buttons. And let's go down to our Python now. Let's look at app.py. So app.py has a bunch of imports. Now we're looking at this channel name called users updated, okay? We're loading in our database. And then we go down here, we're making all of our users, and then, so this is a function that says emit all OAuth users. So it's getting all the users from our table auth users, or auth user, and then it's emitting all users. So again, that's not great that we're emitting all the users, but it's good enough for these demos. There's another function, push new user to database, which I'm assuming does exactly that. So if the name not equal to John Doe, that's a weird check, but anyway, if the name's not equal to that, push to the database and then commit, and then emit all users. Okay, so it's saying remove this check after the logic works. So remember again that when we go up to our scripts and look at like GitHub button, this has a hard-coded name of John Doe. So we don't want those hard-coded names. We want to replace that logic and then remove this check. So eventually it's going to look something like this. But for now, let's leave the check in because we know that the logic isn't working yet. Okay, And then on connect, we're emitting all users. Then there's a print. So this is the socket new GitHub user. So again, that's the same one that we emitted to here, new GitHub user. So now on the server side, we're like, oh, we got a new GitHub user. We print that into our console. So if I go to my Python, I should be able to see that inside of here somewhere. Way up here. Okay. Got an event for a new Facebook user, GitHub user, stuff like that. Great. Okay. So we're printing that, and then there's a to-do. Presumably we can probably fill this in right now. We want to push that new user to the database. So let's go ahead and call that, push new user to database. And then the name is going to be data.something, presumably. So for now, we have data.name inside of that dictionary of data. We just say data.name. And then something here. What is this auth type? I have no idea what the auth type is. I don't know what we're supposed to do with it. So let's just call this a to-do for now. And it's going to be the same for all of these, presumably, but the different auth types. Okay. And then app.route and socket.io.run look pretty standard, so I'm going to skip over reading those. Okay. Models.py. Let's take a look at this, because way up here inside of dbsession.add, I'm doing models.authUser. So let's figure out what authUser is. So first of all, authUser is implementing dbModel, which means it's SQL Alchemy, which basically means it corresponds to a SQL table. So we have an ID, we have an auth type, and a name. We initialize this class using a name and an auth type. So if we go back here, we should see that. We see a name and an auth type. That's why we need to pass in an auth type to push new users to DB. Okay, so we have the name and the auth type. We have something that says assert type auth type is auth user type. Okay, let's skip over that, and then we're just saying that these different class objects, like these different class properties, are set to these. Cool. What this assert is going to do is, this is a concept called enums in programming. So enums are like a restricted value of inputs. So if I'm saying assert the type of this is auth user type, it's basically going to say assert that this value is one of these values inside of here. So it's either LinkedIn, Google, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, GitHub, or password. So if I have if auth type is equal to I don't know, Sresht or something like that, it's just going to throw an error right here. It's going to stop going forward, and it's just going to be like, I don't like that. So basically for now, we should just presume that this check is basically going to make sure that it's one of these values. So going back here, we have to pass in that auth type. Let's figure out what that auth type should be. So this should be GitHub. This is a new GitHub user. So this should probably say the auth type is GitHub. So we could presumably just pass it in as a string like this. But that's not great. We don't want random strings flying all over the place. So one thing we can do is actually do models.authUserType.GitHub. And this is how you use enums in most programming languages. And this is a very powerful thing to do in a lot of programming languages, and this is how to elevate your software engineering game. You do assertions and make sure that you use enums so that you're sure that you know exactly what type of data you're passing in. So push new user to DB, we have data.name models.authUserType.GitHub. Similar thing we're just going to do for Facebook, and I'm not going to do all of them right now, but instead of GitHub, we just want Facebook inside of there. Great. And let's see, is there anything else that we want to go over? I don't think so. Now we can actually start figuring out how to implement OAuth. So the next to-do that we're actually going to tackle is, for example, one of these to-dos. So to-do replace with name from OAuth. We're not going to do all 6 of them in class or anything like that, but we're going to take a look at one of them, and then we're going to implement the OAuth, and then basically what we're trying to do right now is replace line 6 with the real name from OAuth.